and madly teach. Chapter 3, The Doctrines of Modern Education, Part 1. Number 1, modern education says, the school must educate the whole child. It must be so organized that it meets the developmental demands of every side of the child's nature, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, physical. We are all apt to make the mistake of thinking of education only in its formalized aspect. If you were playing one of those parlor games that educators call objective tests, and were given the word education and asked to write opposite it the first associated thing that came into your mind, wouldn't you be apt to write school? We instinctively think of education as something we get from organized courses in a formal institution. Because of a persistent confusion in modern educational theory, it is imperative that we emphasize the obvious truth that as education is the whole process of adapting the individual to the environment, the school can only be one factor in that process, not necessarily even the most important one. In the beginning of a child's life, parents are the primary educators. Under their tutelage, the child develops rudimentary physical and verbal skills and elementary manners, tastes, and social and moral attitudes, and this before he or she ever sees the inside of a school. As he grows older, all the sorts of situations and institutions outside the school contribute to his education. Informal association with other people, independent reading, games, the movies, radio, the church, clubs, the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, or any of the many organizations that flourish among us. Nor does education cease with adult life. Rather, where active intelligence capable of reflective thought is present, education ripens into mature wisdom. This is the kind of education of which Clemenceau spoke when he said, "All that I know I learned after I was 30. This truism about education, that it is a continuous process derived from the total environment, is an idea accepted universally, even by modern educators. But where the theories of the latter run off into confusion and their practice into chaos is in their failure to draw any clear distinctions regarding the role of the different forces of the environment should play in the development and education of youth. While the home, the school, the church, and the community are social forces impinging on each other, they are each distinctive in nature and have different functions. The tendency of modern education, or more particularly public school education, is to aggregate all these functions in the school. A persistent current theory is that education is life, and this is interpreted to mean that the school should try to do everything, that it should try artificially to reproduce the total environment in the school. The Educational Policies Commission of the National Educational Association, the most powerful and influential educational organization in this country, in its 1944 report entitled Education for All American Youth, says, quote, "It is the job of the school to meet the common and specific individual needs of youth," unquote. These needs turn out to be 10 in number and include the need to develop saleable skills, to develop and maintain physical fitness, to understand the rights and duties of a citizen in a democracy, to understand the significance of the family, to know how to purchase and use goods and services, to understand the influence of science on human life, to develop appreciation of literature, art, music, and nature, to be able to use leisure time wisely, to develop respect for other persons, and to grow in ability to think rationally. Here surely is a comprehensive program covering everything, except, of course, in how to come in and out of the rain. Here's a program that frankly proposes that the school should take over the total education of youth. Don't think this is only a paper blueprint dreamed up by a professional planner. It is not exceptional, but representative. And more schools throughout the country are being devoted to the all-inclusive program it advocates. State departments of education are strenuously propagandizing in its behalf. I refer you specifically to two typical reports: Basic Issues in Secondary Education, issued by the New York State Education Department, and one emanating from Connecticut with the mouth-filling title, The Redirection, Reorganization, and Retooling of Secondary Education. The Connecticut report, in particular, is worth studying, for it is detailed and specific in regard to the curriculum. In addition to the traditional studies, English, mathematics, languages, science, here is only a partial list of the things the high school is expected to teach. Socioeconomic problems, home care of the sick, driver education, safe living, industrial hygiene, community health, care of children, home decorating, consumer education, boy and girl problems, personal grooming, hospitality, an understanding of reproduction, occupational training, and housing. And to take care of the students' spare time, if any, the report advocates the organizing of a special department in which, quote, every worthy purpose and valuable interest of the individual may have a place, unquote. Both these reports recognize that if this program is to be effective, the school must have more of the students' time. The Connecticut report speaks of the tyranny of the short school day, and the New York report states that, quote, in the future there must be educational dividends during the summer months. Translated from professional jargon, or pedagogues, into English, I suppose this last statement means that youth must be compelled to attend a school throughout the year. The National Educational Association recommends an increase of about 28% over the present average length of term in public schools, and most educators, following the lead of this association, also advocate that the present state laws, which generally call for compulsory school attendance until the age of 16, be raised to 18. The tendency to broaden the function and scope of the public school has given rise to another movement which is being pushed with great vigor at the moment, the so-called community school. Its advocates maintain that the school should be the center of community life and should draw in not only youth, but adults who would use the school building in the evenings for adult education, hobby training, courses in homemaking, canning, woodworking, masonry, catering. In short, as Dr. N.L. Engelhardt, a leader in the movement, has said, the school will serve all and sundry educational needs of the community. Not as a term of abuse, but simply as a descriptive adjective, the word might fitly apply to this system of education is totalitarian. For its aim is to have the school assume responsibility for the total education of youth up to the age of 18 and to extend its domain into the field of mature education. But in this diffuseness of modern education lies one of its principal weaknesses. One is reminded of the remark about Napoleon, that the trouble with him was that he tried to do too much and did it. In trying to do too much, in trying to play all the roles in the educational drama, the modern school fails to do complete justice to any and leaves the audience confused with the only foggiest notions of what the play is all about. Educators are fond of making re-evaluations of their system to discuss what is wrong, but invariably they emerge from this soul-searching not with the thought that they are doing too much, but that they aren't doing enough. The remedy always consists of piling some new weights on the back of the school system until today it threatens to collapse from sheer overloading. While the scope of the school is thus being greatly enlarged, we expect less and less from the student in the way of genuine educational accomplishment. A recent commissioner of education of the state of Connecticut not so long ago made the astounding statement that we have a right to expect the high school graduate to know how to write a letter, carry on a telephone conversation, send a telegram, or carry on an intelligent interview. There's a noble mark to aim at. As our high schools spend less and less time on serious education and more on matters that can be best learned outside of schools, there is an inevitable drop in standards all along the line. The lowering of college entrance requirements, which has been going on for the past 20 years or so, now somewhat abated because the currently overcrowded colleges can be more selective, is directly traceable to the diluted education that has been going on in our public schools. Graduates simply can't make the grade, and if the colleges are not to close up shop, they have to accept inferior material. The idea that the schools should take over total education has appeared in other places, but it has until recently been strange to American thought and life. It may be part of an irresistible historical force, the tide of which we can do little to abate. I refer to the modern lessening of individual freedom and the exaltation of the power of the social group in the state. The feeling for individual freedom and individual responsibility has never, in modern times, been at a lower ebb. And as we are all ready and anxious to turn our problems and our lives over to the political power, what is more natural than that we should entrust that power with the complete education of our children? But is it too late to warn educators who are, we can assume, good men and women, not evil, motivated by the best of ideals, that humane zealots for total systems of any kind can slip over into tyranny? Those who devise overall plans for salvation hope they will be voluntarily accepted. But as success depends on acceptance of the plan, it will be necessary to eliminate opposition. Confirmed do-gooders always end up by doing good by coercion. Their devotion to the end will blind them to the deviousness of the means employed. The situation in this country in regard to compulsory military training is not without relevance to my point. Since the President of the United States, Army leaders, and other distinguished citizens, convinced of the value of compulsory military training for the youth of this country, were aware of the fact that such a program is fundamentally repugnant to a large section of the American people, they attempted to present it in another guise. One of the interesting things about this situation is the statement that Mr. Truman made to his commission appointed to study the problem. Truman said, "I want that word military left out. I want our young people to be informed on what this government is, what it stands for, its responsibilities. Now, I think the best way to do this is through a universal training program. I don't like to think of it as a universal military training program. I want it to be a universal training program, giving our young people a background in the disciplinary approach of getting along with one another, informing them of their physical makeup and what it means to take care of this temple which God gave us." Unquote. Even for a gentleman notoriously adept at the process, this is a new high in letting a whole series of cats out of bags. So our young people are to learn the disciplinary approach of getting along with one another, are they? In other times, we talked about freedom and left that kind of discipline to the Prussians. And if 18-year-olds have to be informed as to what this government stands for and have yet to learn about their own physical makeup, what does this imply about our schools, which are supposed to have been teaching these things all along? The commission goes along docilely with Mr. Truman's moral hedging about enumerating among the benefits of compulsory training the opportunities it would afford for, quote, inculcating spiritual and moral ideals in support of the American democracy, unquote. There's a sort of moral abandon shown by the proponents of this scheme and their willingness to use the worst means to achieve what they sincerely think are good ends. For this training is to be done by the Army, which no sane person has ever considered a good educative influence. Armies are unfortunately all too necessary, but it is criminally foolish to pretend that their purpose is anything other than defense and offense in war. That is, preventing as many deaths as possible on one side and causing as many deaths as possible on the other side. If we think it a worthy aim to give young people a background in the disciplinary approach of getting along with one another, then the Army, God knows, is an ideal teacher, for its discipline is the easiest sort to teach. It simply consists of assuming life and death authority over individuals. And I wonder if the eminent gentlemen of the Commission have really convinced themselves that the Army is a competent teacher of the spiritual and moral ideals of democracy. That sincere Democrats believe in this sort of thing is another indication of how widespread and infectious is the current distrust of freedom. An ironic fact emerges out of the history of the last 50 years. During this period, while men have been steadily turning away from religious and moral absolutes, they have been caught up ever tighter in the grip of another absolutism, that of the social group and the state. And part of the irony is that in England and America, the leaders in this movement of setting up the authority of the collective are the heirs of historic liberalism, which was firmly rooted, in the words of Ramsay Muir, in a, quote, conviction that the source of all progress lies in the free exercise of individual energy, unquote. An uneasy fear haunts both the advocates of total education and of military training. The feeling that the free agencies of society, and especially the home, have broken down and left youth aimlessly drifting, rudderless. This same feeling swept over Germany after the First World War and caused good people to accept the Nazi philosophy that the state must take over all the activities of youth. Although it should be added that here the process was made simpler by the average German's native desire to throw himself into the arms of authority. The schools and the army, therefore, must take over and not only do the jobs they are best fitted to do, but do the job of the home as well. If we admit that the home is broken down, the statistics of divorce and juvenile delinquency and crime do not indicate a state of vigorous health. We are in a sorry state indeed. We are saying that we, as individuals, are no longer capable of managing our own lives. And this is another way of saying that society is sick unto death. There is no need to wax sentimental over the American home. Like other institutions of society, it is full of faults. But a healthy society is based on the family, operating as a free and responsible agency. And each time the family relinquishes any of its functions to the social group or the state, our free society is thereby weakened. Not all those individuals who opposed compulsory education a century and more ago were reactionaries. Some of them had clear prescience of the dangers of such a system. In view of the present development of our schools, can we say they were entirely wrong? Founded as a convenient device for the purpose of transmitting the heritage of the race from generation to generation, our schools, under the political power, have aggregated unto themselves more and more functions. Today, our schoolman, with his determination to educate the whole child, finds the home and parents simply embarrassments to the accomplishments of his purpose. Perhaps in a happier future, when the school building is used all day for youth and all evening for adults, children can leave by the front door while their parents enter by the rear, thus avoiding all corrupting contacts and leaving the schoolman untrammeled in his efforts to educate the whole child.